In this video, we're going to talk about the supplies and ingredients that you need to make tomatillo sauce. You'll need 2 tablespoons of salt, 2½ teaspoons of ground cumin. You're going to need about 7½ pounds of tomatillos, which equals out to about 5½ cups depending on the size of the tomatillos. You're going to need 2½ cups of minced onion. I'm going to be using a yellow onion. You can use a white one if you prefer. You're going to need 5 to 6 cloves of garlic. You're going to need 1/3 cup of minced cilantro. You're going to need 1 cup of bottled lime or lemon juice. And you're going to need some peppers. Now I'm going to be using a mixture of some jalapenos and some Anaheims from our garden. You can use all jalapenos. You can use a sweeter pepper if that's what you prefer. And then you're also going to need some disposable gloves for while you're chopping up your peppers. The tools that you're going to need for this class include an oven in order to roast the tomatillos. You're going to need your regular measuring items, measuring cup, measuring spoons. You're going to need your canning jars, rings, and lids. Jar lifter if you have it. Spatula to remove the air bubbles from your jars. A ladle. A pan to roast your tomatillos on. I like to line mine with foil. You're going to need a canning funnel, and then you're also going to need either a water bath canner or a pressure canner. The first thing we have to do is to get our tomatillos ready. Usually when you purchase tomatillos, they're going to have a paper-like husk on them. So we're going to remove that, and usually when you pull that husk off, the stem also comes with it. It's just going to go through. You can usually just break it off, pull it back. And tomatillos come in a variety of shapes and sizes. You just want to make sure that the tomatillo, when you purchase them, that when you look inside or you squeeze it, that the tomatillo feels nice and firm and doesn't look like it's old, which it'll start to kind of wrinkle up. And if you've never peeled a tomatillo, it is normal for the skin, that outer husk, to be a little bit sticky. Once you get done peeling all of the husk off of them, then we're going to take them over and rinse them off. I'm going to go ahead and before I start washing these, I'm going to get my oven heating up. I want to set it for 400 degrees. And if you prefer, you can roast these outside on the grill. Completely up to you. So now that my tomatillos have been rinsed off, I'm going to take a knife and I'm going to cut them in half, like so. And then we're going to place them with the cut side down on the pan. And because these are going to shrink up, you can smush them in really tight on your pan. Just don't stack them on top of each other. And depending on your oven, if you went ahead and you started preheating it before you washed your tomatillos, by the time you're done cutting them, it should be heated up and ready to go. So I got all the tomatillos onto the tray for roasting. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take my cloves of garlic. I've left them unpeeled. I'm just going to place them in some spots here. It's going to allow the garlic to roast at the same time. I'm going to pop this into the oven and I'm going to roast them for about 15 to 20 minutes. What I'm looking for is for the tops of the tomatillos to turn kind of a golden brown. They're going to soften up and they're going to start releasing the tomatillo sauce or juice from the tomatillo onto the pan. To save some time, I'm going to go ahead and while my tomatillos are roasting, I'm going to get my onions, jalapenos, and cilantro chopped up. For the onions, you want 2½ cups of minced onion. So I'm going to chop it up fairly close to mincing it, but since I'm going to run this through the blender, it doesn't have to be really small. So that was 1 large onion. And as you can see, 1 large onion is pretty close to 2.5 cups. Side, and move on to the cilantro. We're going to use 1/3 cup of this cilantro in the recipe. Alright, so we've got the tomatillos roasting, the onions are chopped up, the cilantro is chopped up. That leaves the peppers. Now, I'm pretty sensitive to peppers. I like to wear gloves when I'm using them. I'm going to be using a variety of peppers. I've got some bananas, some jalapenos, and some Anaheim peppers. First thing we're going to do is chop off the tops off of all of them. Once you have the tops off of all of them, we're going to cut them in half, long ways. Now what we want to do is get the seed and the membrane out of it. So I'm going to take the tomato core and I'm just going to scrape away the membrane and the seeds. Once you have the membrane removed from all of them and the seeds, we're just going to roughly chop them. Chopping these because they are going to go into the blender with the tomatillos, and that's going to chop them up even smaller. So now that I've got everything chopped up, I'm going to go ahead and just add it on top of these onions. It's all going to go in together. And I'm going to check on the tomatillos and see how they look. So I went ahead and I took the tomatillos and the roasted garlic out of the oven. As you can see, it's smushy. It's starting to turn brown on the tops. And there is quite a bit of liquid here. What I'm going to do is go ahead and pull the roasted garlic off and set it to the side. Hopefully you can see there's quite a bit of liquid on the pan. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and start scooping the tomatillos, and I'm going to place them into my blender. My blender instructions say that it's okay to place hot foods into it. If yours does not, then go ahead and let the tomatillos cool before you place them in there. You do want to be careful if you're scooping it while it's hot so you don't get burnt. And I didn't remove the skin, I just removed that outer husk. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab some oven mitts. And I'm going to pour the liquid into the blender. And if you placed foil on your pan, your cleanup will be really easy. Now that I've got all of the tomatillos and the sauce in the blender, I'm going to go ahead and top that with the onions, the peppers, and the cilantro. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to add 2.5 teaspoons of ground cumin and 2 tablespoons of salt. You can adjust these, and you can even add some other spices if you'd like. Now for the lime juice. Now remember, you only need to use the lime or lemon juice, either one, if you're going to be canning this. If you're not, you don't have to. It's totally optional. So what we're going to do is I got my lid on here tight. I'm going to take this over to the blender. I'm going to blend it at a moderate speed, and what I'm watching for is for all of this to blend up, but I still want it so that I can see little chunks of the cilantro. So I'm going to start off on a low speed with my blender. Just kind of get it blending. Go ahead and increase it just a bit. You'll see it start to pull the stuff from the top to the bottom. I still see little chunks of the cilantro, which is what we want, but everything else is blended and chopped down. You can see that it's mixed well. So I'm going to go ahead and take it back over to the stove. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pour my mixture into the pan slowly. rubber spatula and get all of it out. Now this is all pretty hot since it went directly from the oven to the blender. But what I want to do is go ahead and I want to get this boiling before I place it into my jars. So while this is warming up, I'm going to go ahead and get my jars, lids, and rings ready. The tomatillo sauce is boiling, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it off. So I've got my jar, and what I'm going to do is fill this so that there is a 1/2 inch of headspace. The easiest way to measure headspace is from here, this first ring to the top is 1 inch. From the second ring to the top is a 1/2 inch, and that's what we want. So I'm going to fill the jar almost to the top of this second ring. I'm going to remove the air bubbles and then top it off if needed. So what I'm watching for is to be close to this line here with the sauce. And as I'm ladling it, I'm going to stir it. And this is a pint-sized jar. I'm going to go ahead and take my funnel and place it in my next jar. Okay, so after you have your jar filled, you're going to take your spatula, and you just place it down along the side of the jar in a couple of spots. That's going to remove any air bubbles. Now I'm still at a 1/2 inch of headspace, so that's where I'm going to leave it. I'm going to go on to the next jar. Once all of your jars are filled, you want to take a damp towel and wipe the rim. That's going to make sure there's nothing on the jar that might get in the way of sealing it. Place your lid on top. Secure the ring, but don't over tighten it. And place it down into your canner. You do want to make sure that you have the rack that goes in the bottom of your canner in there before you place your jars in there. So once you have all of your jars into your canner, whether you're using water bath method or pressure canner, go ahead and get your lid on there. Turn your stovetop on and set your timer. Now since tomatillos are in the fruit family, just like tomatoes, you can use the water bath method for canning these. I'm going to go ahead and use my pressure canner though. And in the printable section of this workshop, I'm going to include both sets of instructions. So I'm going to go ahead and set my timer and watch my pressure gauge based on my altitude. And again, you're going to find all of those instructions in the printable section of this workshop. Once my timer goes off, then I'll go ahead, start the video back up, because the instructions from there on are the same whether you're using a water bath method or the pressure canner. Once your timer goes off, you want to go ahead and remove your lid. Whether it's water bath or pressure canner, you want to make sure that you lift it away from you. A lot of steam's going to come out. You're going to want to go ahead and let your jars sit and decrease their temperature just a bit for about 10 to 15 minutes. While you're waiting for the jars to cool, go ahead and grab a kitchen towel and lay it out someplace where the jars won't be disturbed, because you're going to want to set them on top of that while they cool down. Once you've allowed your jars to cool down for about 10 minutes or so, go ahead and take your jar tongs. You're going to reach in, get your jars out one by one, and then go and place them on a towel so that they can cool off. Make sure that you don't touch the center or mess with the rings or the lids while they cool. After you get all your jars moved over to the dish towels to cool, you want to leave them here for 24 hours. And during that time, like I said, make sure that you don't touch the top of the jar or mess with the rings. You just want to leave them and let them cool down. You may notice some bubbling. That's completely normal. And at some point, you should hear like a little ping sound, and that's going to be the center of this pulling down and your jar sealing. So it's been 24 hours. What I'm going to do now is go ahead and check on my jars. I'm going to remove the lid. I'm going to feel the top. Make sure that it's not able to be pressed up and down, which means it's sealed. I'm also going to take my finger, just go around the jar, and see if it lifts up. It does not, so that means that this jar is completely sealed. Now I'm going to take the jars over to the sink, clean them up, dry them, and store them in my pantry. If your jar is sealed completely, then they can be stored in the pantry for up to 1 year. After you open your sauce, if you don't use all of it, it can be stored in the refrigerator for a couple of days.